Hi folks, welcome to Floof Talk, the show where Furry Valley's fluffiest furs discuss whatever it is you want to hear. I'm Nova the Bass Skunk, and I'm here with leader of Furry Valley and probably smellier than the skunko, it's Simba. And Simba, how are you tonight?
Wow, I'm offended already, and we're only just getting started. I'm good otherwise. How about you?
I'm doing well other than the constant implication that I don't shower.
I thought you liked it that way.
Y'all make that assumption. Blame the skunk and me. Alrighty. So, over the last couple episodes, we've discussed exoplanets, call out culture, capitalism, coming out as LGBT, and a number of other subjects. Absolutely everything is on the table, so if you have anything you want to hear us discuss tonight, leave it in the Floof Talk text channel right above this voice chat. If you're watching on Twitch, you can leave your questions in the Twitch chat, and our streaming admins will pass them along to us. I'd also like to remind everyone to mute your microphones during the show. Any discussion you have can go in the speaking voice chat right next to the Floof Talk chat. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. So, our first topic tonight is learning a foreign language. And Simba, I know you can speak five, six languages fluently.
Not fluently, certainly not fluently. I can speak four languages reasonably. I think that's fair. How about you?
I can speak conversational Spanish, and that's about it.
That's still pretty cool. I think Americans especially have a bit of a reputation for all being monolingual. I think in Europe we have a little bit more of a. I mean, the UK is maybe a little bit like that, but in Europe tend to be quite normal to speak two, three, four languages.
I find that funny considering just how multicultural America is. I mean, no
I
matter where you go, you can find someone to speak Spanish with, but there are also lots of small, maybe not isolated, but still out there communities that don't speak English whatsoever. But you can get around with English basically anywhere in Western Europe, isn't that's fair, right?
um yeah, well, that is fair, but much the same way as I think it's a sort of racist thing to a point where a lot of Americans will say, "You're in America, you speak American here," and they won't have if you start talking Spanish, you get racist comments and such. The same is true to a point in Western Europe if you go to especially areas outside of cities in France, for example, and you talk to English to people, they'll talking English to people, they'll be very offended. They feel quite strongly you should talk French here, and I guess it's sort of the same in Quebec and in Canada as well. That yeah, they do talk English, but I think it's actually a crime not to speak in French first in Quebec or something like that. Um, so yeah, whether or not people can speak another language, I think often doesn't correlate with whether they're willing to or feel comfortable speaking that language.
I think that's fair to say, but especially in America, considering, like I said last show, money speaks.
Mm,
You'll see groups like McDonald's now in heavily multicultural areas. They'll require people who apply to be able to speak whatever the other dominant language is there. It's getting to the point where it's almost required in some areas to have to learn these other languages.
that's very strange because you sort of think of kids who are 14, 15 years old, they get their first job at McDonald's or Burger King. And if you're going to pay a kid below minimum wage to work in these places, you're really going to require two languages. That's sort of specialist. It's not, no, not everyone has that.
But that's kind of buying into the whole part-time or minimum wage jobs are only for young folk myth,
Well,
where 50% of all people working those jobs are 35 plus with children.
I mean, certainly in the UK, it's pretty standard. If you're going to get a job while in school, you either work in McDonald's, Burger King, or you work a paper round. There's not really anywhere else that hires kids that young because they have to have flexibility. They have to be able to say, okay, I just want to work on the weekends and say Tuesday evening or something. And most jobs won't let you do that. So I don't know whether it's different in America and a lot of other careers for young kids have more flexibility. But certainly here, it's like that.
I mean, there's a lot of farming jobs around here, but more so there's more minimum wage crap jobs than there are people that age looking for jobs.
Oh, okay. Hmm. How much of a sort of push is it from parents of kids who are about 14, 15 to get a job? Or is it sort of as long as you're in school, that's fine, but as long as you're not in school, you got to get a job? What is it like culturally there?
It seems to me that if you're working a job that early, it's because it's necessary.
Okay, I see. It's sort of bringing it back to foreign language, though, the way that languages are taught in schools tends to be very ineffective. You'll be given a list of vocabulary to study and to just learn in a vacuum, sort of learn abstractly, and actually effectively learning a foreign language. You're much better off learning sentences because that kind of gives you grammar for free. And as you learn more vocab, you can just substitute in words. Like if I know the Japanese for I'm going to go to the, I don't know, to the grocery store, then if I then learn the word for park, I can very easily say I'm going to go to the park. And you speak in sentences at the end of the day. Learning lots and lots and lots of vocabulary, which is what we do in school, doesn't necessarily help you put it together in the right order. And much like people um, in India is a good example. They learn English and yeah, they kind of use the right words, but they don't use them in the right order, or they don't conjugate them properly. And so by learning in sentences, which we don't do in school, we really ought to, people learn a lot better.
I think we need to be making a bigger push for, and we talk about how we should be learning languages. We haven't really discussed why. And I mean, any study you do shows that being able to learn another language, it opens up your reading comprehension in both your native language and whatever language you're learning. Increases your critical thinking skills. But I think the consensus is the time of most malleability in that area in the brain is something like 3 to 6. So,
That's completely disproven now.
oh, is it really?
It is, yeah, yeah.
What do they say now?
Any age. Humans have the capacity to build up a substance called myelin at any age as effectively as when they're a child. The reason why children seem to be better at learning languages is because they're immersed in that language. Whereas when you're learning as an adult, it's not like you're a baby. You're not just stuck in the middle of Russia and surrounded by Russian language all the time, and you sort of have to learn it like that. And that kind of immersion just isn't available to an adult, which is why an adult appears to learn language more slowly. Adults learn language much more quickly than children do because we have um, the capacity to sort of logically think about what's going on and such. But it's just because your environment doesn't really facilitate it. You can't do it the same way. But if you do pick yourself up and immerse yourself in a foreign country, you can learn a language fluently in 3 months as an adult. Chinese, Japanese, Russian, all the same. It's where you think as a child it takes you 2 or 3 years to be able to speak, not fluently, but you can hold a conversation when you're 2 or 3 year old.
I was actually not aware of that whatsoever. I was going to bring up immersion as being the way that we need to
Mm-hmm.
teach folk, but I didn't know it was going to be equally effective at any point. So
Yeah,
that
yeah.
gives me a lot of hope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. There's no reason why as an adult you can't learn 10 languages. Perfectly reasonable, but you have to immerse yourself as much as possible. So, for example, in high school when I was learning Japanese, I changed all my computers to Japanese. I listened to Japanese radio all the time. I would read bilingual books, they're called, where half of it's in Japanese on one page and then the English is on the other page. And you make what you can. I've got all this dictionary stuff where I hover over a word, it'll tell me what it is. Giving yourself as much as possible in terms of immersion, which you're not going to get by living there, but get as close as you can. And I believe you could become fluent in most languages in 6 months, even if you're living in America still. A lot of effort, of course, but
Thankfully, I get a lot of practice because I do live in a very multicultural area.
mhm.
So, job, even though it's not required, I do end up using a lot of Spanish on a regular basis. But I know that if I both with the experience I get in real life and the way that the best classes I've had in recent years, where they've been immersion classes, where the moment you step in, everything is in Spanish, you only converse in
Yep.
Spanish. Absolutely, absolutely the best growth I've seen in my own talents. But I think we need to promote that more, both for the sake that it makes people more intelligent and it allows them to think more critically, but also because it's important to learn other cultures.
Um, I think that language and culture are intrinsically tied together. Though I'm certainly more interested in the language than the culture. But I think sort of going back to what we spoke about smartphones, because people are finding it more and more easy for the phone to just do everything for them, and translation software is becoming better. I think it will become a dying art to learn a foreign language because why do I need to? People will think, why do I need to learn French? I'll just go to and hold my phone in front of the French person. It'll tell me what they said, and then I'll speak to my phone. It'll tell them in French what I said. And the reality is, give it 10 years, and this will be, it'll just do it almost perfectly. Google Translate is already very good, especially for European languages, it's very good. Um, so yeah, kind of a shame. I think it will become an academic talent, which is unfortunate.
I mean, I think within the next 50 to 75 years, we're going to be moving very quickly toward a globalized language. And that language is likely to be English, but the need to be able to speak other languages is going to be totally relegated to those far off and isolated areas.
Yeah, and there are always cultures that don't integrate. Like you look in the Brazilian rainforest right now, there are tribes who don't really have much contact with the outside world, and mm, we know how that's going right now.
We just got the question from MG who wants to know what my favorite Spanish words are. And my favorite Spanish words are dormimos, which means we sleep, and I think it just sounds fun. And esposa, because that means, or rather, esposo is husband, but esposas is handcuffs. And I find that hilarious.
Hand in handcuffs.
Well, that's how you usually get a husband.
Yeah. Shall we move on?
Yeah, I think that's a perfect time as any.
All right.
So we had a topic come in from Leafy, and Leafy kind of took offense from our first episode where you mentioned that you were not a big fan of tattoos.
No, not at all. Grotesque.
Why do you think they're grotesque?
Because you're damaging your body. Your body mod stuff is I don't like it. And then 20 years later, when you're wrinkly, your tattoo looks shit, and it's like they just look tacky. You know, if I'm gonna hire someone for a job and I see, oh, you've gone and got some dragon on your arm, that really looks cringy. You know, it may be a cultural thing. So in the UK, the kind of people who get tattoos are not the kind of people you'd want to hang out with, and they're not the kind of people who are um sort of it's a sort of grungy class of people, and I say that coming from a working class background. My family's all very poor and such, but it was the kids in my town who had tattoos. They were the kids you didn't go near because they would beat the shit out of you. They're rough types, and so I think I've grown up with that sort of perception. That's ingrained from when I was a very small child, and I don't think I could get rid of that. I wouldn't date someone with a tattoo.
I don't know. I'm very much of the opposite side. I've said it before. If it doesn't hurt anyone else, you do you, boo. And I don't care. If you don't want to date someone with body modifications, that's a totally fair statement to make, especially if they have something extreme like, large gauges, facial piercings, stuff like that.
Yeah, like I mean, how far do you go before you say this is not just affecting you? Like these people who have skulls tattooed on their faces, do you really think that's okay?
I don't see a problem with it. I mean,
But
again, I really don't care. Yeah, I'm sure it hurt like the Dickens, and they're gonna have trouble getting a job. But
yeah, then I mean, where does it become okay? Well, let's view it from a different angle. Where does it become a person self-harming? If you're going to do something to yourself which is going to seriously affect the way you function in society, how is that any different from any other kind of self-harm? And should we do something about that?
I did actually read a study not too long ago, and it doesn't talk about specifics like face tats, neck
Mhm.
tats, hand tats, stuff that's super in your face. But it did show, at least in America, that there is a marginal to no disadvantage in applying for a job with tattoos.
I mean, it has to depend what kind of job and also visibility. But let me tell you, there's no way you're getting a job in professional services in the UK if you've got a face tattoo. You'd really struggle with a neck tattoo because it's just clients would look at you and get that same sort of negative impression that I have. And so a business can't afford to put you in front of a client. It's as simple as that. Now, if you have a hidden, like something on your leg or something, sure, okay, the client won't notice or won't know about it. But I think the more sort of in your face stuff is, mm,
I do really get the knee jerk reaction against it, but it really does not concern me in any facet. Their employability does not affect the way in which myself or anyone else lives their lives.
I think it affects very greatly the way that person lives their life. If you become unemployable because you've got your tongue split, or you've got a nose piercing, or you've got a big tattoo over your face, that does affect the person and affects the person's family and probably their friends to some degree if they're then depressed and going to it about them. I don't know. I think it's perhaps affects people in subtle ways that aren't just like lol, you're offensive. But though, as I said, I don't know. I think I do find it um not offensive per se, but certainly would look down on those sort of people because that's how I've been raised. That's my background is you don't associate with those people because that's how you get in trouble. And I suppose the clients of these professional services are thinking the same way. I
And we
think
do
it's
also have to think that the people who would get these sort of extreme modifications are also not the people looking for 9 to 5 marketing sort of jobs.
no, but I think there are some people who naively went there in, their late teens might get a tattoo on their neck or their hand or something, and then that's visible, and they're not really thinking about it as a 25 or 30-year-old might do.
I'm not sure how it is in the UK, but I mean, they can always go to someone who's not totally respectable, but any respectable tattoo parlor here, they will not give you a neck, face, or hand tattoo unless you have to have multiple already.
Oh, well,
It's not going to stop you from getting it bootlegged at your friend's cousin's house or anything.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean the sort of people who would do that though are the sort of people who would go and do that, at some dodgy place. If I decide when I'm 18 years old or I'm adventurous and I want to go and get a face tattoo, well, if I'm that sort of person, I'm going to go and do it. It's not like you don't do that on a whim, right? You don't decide just, yeah, I might as well get one. Okay, maybe if you're drunk in Magaloo, you might,
I was
but
about to say, you don't decide that on a whim if you're so.
yeah, right. But yeah, we had a court case in the UK recently about a guy who I can't remember exactly what he was doing, but it was some sort of body mod, which was no more extreme than like splitting people's tongues. And he got, I think, sent to jail for 5 years for grievous bodily harm. And it was all consensual. All the people wanted it, and they were paying for him as what they viewed as a perfectly respectable man. He'd been doing it for several years. Um, so clearly, in the eyes of the law, this isn't okay. Now you can say a person has the right to autonomy over their own body, but the fact someone just got jailed I think it was either early this year or late last year, that's very recent. So the precedent is still there for it to be. Mm,
I
I
mean,
think
legality is not morality, though, and that
no, but
in
legality does matter though.
the way I see it, the fact that he would get charged in this day and age for something like that is, I mean, that's puritanical.
Mm, I think there is a matter of protecting people though. These are not things you can reverse in some cases. For a tattoo, okay, mostly you can get them reversed, but that's painful and takes a long time. I think that the extreme body mod stuff really should be illegal because you have to make very, very sure that the person is mentally sound before you conduct any kind of cosmetic surgery on them. And I'm not sure some tattooist or some body mod person is going to be of sufficient training to make that kind of mental assessment on someone. And so I think to protect people who are vulnerable, it's important to have a legal precedent here.
I'm inclined to agree to an extent, though at the same time, there's just something that tells me that having to go to a psychiatrist to go get an ear gauge is it's a little too much. And don't forget, this is most extreme body modifications are not something that you can just go and get done. I looked for a while and at the process of getting my ears gauged, and it takes months upon months. Thankfully, I did not do it, but
I think it's a generational thing as well. The younger people tend to be more okay with it. My parents, if they saw someone with a tattoo, they'd be aghast. My grandparents, even more so. But I think people our age sort of notice it and just think, shrug. It's same as like LGBT stuff. It's less of a problem to us than it was to our parents and grandparents. People generally, I think, become more accepting of strange things or what they view as abnormal things as time goes on.
alrighty. We've rambled enough about that. Do we want to move on to the next
Yes,
subject?
yeah.
So it looks like you wanted to talk about game theory tonight.
Yeah, something a bit different. So two paradoxes which I'd like to introduce you guys to. The first is Zeno's paradox, which is the idea that if you have a tortoise racing a hare or a man, and the tortoise gets a head start, then the man can never catch the tortoise. So the idea goes like this. Suppose the tortoise is 100 meters ahead of the man. Now, by the time the man has run 100 meters, if the tortoise goes half as fast, the tortoise has moved another 50 meters, so the man's still behind by 50 meters. Now, the man runs 50 meters to catch up, but then the tortoise has moved another 25 meters, and so the tortoise is still ahead. And so every time the man catches the tortoise has moved on a little further. And so the paradox goes that the man can never catch the tortoise, which is kind of cool. And this dates back thousands of years. Zeno was I don't know, he was Roman or Greek, but a philosopher. It's an interesting paradox, and it leads to the idea of a geometric sequence. What we call it in mathematics, which is where the ratio between terms is a fixed number in a sequence. In this case, it gets half each time because it goes half as far in terms of catching the tortoise. But yeah, the reality, of course, is that you can catch a tortoise. It'd be kind of worrying if you couldn't.
I'm trying to get over that pronunciation of tortoise there, but
Oh God, tortoise, tortoise. That's very American. Yeah, we say tortoise.
we don't have the time to pronounce all those extra letters you like to put in there.
Yeah, it's like Tordus, Tordus. It's like TARDIS, like the Doctor
Yeah,
Who thing
exactly.
almost.
Just said
Yeah, they were laughing at me the way I say turtle as well, because you say like turtle, like squirtle, squirtle.
that's something I can get over. The fact that y'all Brits will actually pronounce the net that isn't at the beginning of a sentence, but
Yeah.
we don't even say t's around here. I just said the word sentence and I skipped like 3 letters.
In my native accent, we use what's called a glottal stop in place of a T, which means we don't say T's either. In American, you tend to use a D instead of a T, like you'd say 14, 14, whereas we say 14. Or in my native accent, we say 14, like it's a glottal stop instead of. But accents are cool. We need to do a segment on those at some point.
Absolutely. Super fascinated by accents.
Going back to game theory just a little bit longer, the second sort of game theory thing I'd like to bring to your attention, and this is quite a cool problem. So it's originally from a game show. It's called the Monty Hall paradox. The idea is that you run a game show and you're given a choice between three doors, and behind one of them there's a goat, behind one of them there's nothing at all, and behind one of them there's a car. And you basically want to find where's the car. So what happens first is you choose one of the three doors, choose whichever one you want. And then what happens is the host of the show says, okay, I'm going to show you of the other two doors, the car is not behind this door. And they'll open the door and show. And the idea is, well, do you switch your choice or not? So you can either keep your original choice and you think the car's behind that door, or you can switch to the other one. And the paradox goes, what's the chance? What's the correct thing to do? Should you switch or should you keep the same choice? And generally people will say, well, I'll stick to what I want because I chose that and I'm going to believe that. So it's like deal or no deal. No one ever switches the box at the end, right? So people then stick to the same door because they think, well, it's a 50-50 chance. That's two doors. I chose this one, so it's as likely either way. Do you know, Nova, what's the chance?
I mean, from the obvious odds are no matter what you picked, it's going to be 1 1/3. But because in picking your first door and seeing the results of another, you now know that there is a 2/3 chance that you picked the right door. So, from a theoretical standpoint, you want to keep the door you have, but I was going to ask you about that. Is that a functional statistic, or is that just some mumbo jumbo there?
So you're applying what's called Bayesian probability, but you've done it the wrong way around. So actually, it's 2/3 chance it's behind the other door. You can kind of think of it like this. To begin with, it's 1/3 for each of the three doors, but that means it's 1/3 for your door and it's 2/3 for the other two. So if I show you the car is not behind one of the other two, there's still that 2/3 chance there, but it's now glopped all behind the single door that's left of those two. So actually, you're twice as likely to get the car if you switch. In practice, this is from a real game show they had in the 80s, and it was very rare people switched, but they really ought to. It's a much better strategy to switch. As strange as it sounds.
It makes perfect sense to me, and yet at the same time, I am just not willing to submit to it.
Yep. Game theory is it's interesting. There's another super quick one about it's called the prisoner's dilemma, and in short you get a choice between if you both tell the guard that you did the crime together, you get a short jail sentence, but if one of you snitches on the other, then you get away free, but your friend goes to jail for a long time. And if both of you snitch, you both go to jail for a long time. And it sounds like, well, we should both just stay quiet because then we each get a little bit of jail time, and that's okay. We both do okay, I guess. But it turns out the best strategy is you both should lie. You both should say, no, it was just him. And that means you both get jail for a long time. But it doesn't make sense to not do that. And game theory is weird. It comes out with strange results like this. But yeah.
And that's one I know that they've studied a lot.
Yeah.
It was an academic institution that did that every couple years. And they said over the course of a dozen or so, they've only ever had one. The idea was you all get a singular point added to your grade total. But if any of you take that, all of you have the opportunity to take an extra 10 points.
Yeah.
And if you do so, no one else gets the points. Same deal.
Yeah,
and they found only once did it ever turn out that everyone took the 1 point, and they said it was a total anomaly and they can't explain it.
Yeah. Certainly makes sense, game theory wise, to steal. so as the case may be.
For anyone who joins us, Jackbox on Fridays, we have just ruined Trivia Murder Party for you.
Yeah, steal the money. If the money is there, take the money. It doesn't matter if you get killed for it. Take the money anyway. Because there's always one nice, where's my friends? You won't really steal it, will you? Steal the fucking money. It works. I'm not advocating, just Malachi time. I'm not advocating stealing does not represent the values of Furry Valley, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Before I get in trouble by our legal expert.
All right. Do we want to move on to
I think we should before I get in trouble.
So it looks like the next topic we had was biohacking. And that's been getting really big lately, especially since CRISPR technology has started getting bigger and almost consumer level. Not that you can go out there and say, "Oh, I want bigger muscles. I'm going to buy this CRISPR thing and shove
Yeah,
it in my arm." But there's nothing stopping the average person from going out and getting gene modification technology. That's crazy.
it is a bit strange, but I think it's also very dangerous. I think giving this sort of technology to normal people is very dangerous. It needs regulation. A lot of this sort of new tech stuff, governments don't regulate fast enough, and it causes problems. I think some of it's less of a danger, though. I think some of this technology is more acceptable, though. For example, having like a little chip implant, which can enable you access to certain buildings and such. Suppose that you work in security instead of having a load of little cards that you have to go and press up against the sensors and such. That's okay. Um, but the more extreme stuff, yeah, you can't give genetic editing technology to normal people. They don't know how genetics works. So, yeah, I think that's not good. And I think there's also even if they did know how to change certain genes, there's the idea of that. Do they really want to? Can they make that decision for themselves? Maybe they'll hurt themselves more than they help themselves, and the technology isn't there to. Um, we don't know what the long-term impacts of this are. Sort of worrying.
I mean, in the question of should we be allowing them to, in the sense of is it what they really want,
Mm,
it more comes down to the fact that these things are being advertised as science, quote unquote. You know, buzzword science. Science says this, therefore it's okay. In the same way
mm.
that we have all these other fake studies. But can I blame someone for being told that it's scientifically sound to stab their arm with a needle and be able to grow muscles quicker? And Munch already brought it up. No, I'm not talking about steroids. I'm talking about actual DNA modification where you look at the little skunko here and you look at someone who is native born Samoan, and there is a genetic difference into just the actual body mass that can be naturally built. If someone says you can have this just through DNA modification that's safe, then yeah, you know, I'm probably going to take it. But like we said last episode, it's a case of historiographical illiteracy. People are incapable of telling what's real and what's not. Maverick says it's pseudoscience, and it's really not. It's
No,
just
it's not.
untested science.
I think it's also worth pointing out, as far as biohacking is concerned, it's not always modification stuff. So we have the ketone diet is very big at the moment, and that's quite big on all these biohacker forums and stuff. The idea is that you can get your body to be more healthy by it's a it sort of prefers to digest fats rather than sugar, or perhaps it's the other way around. I can't remember how it works, but it's not always invasive. I think there are some sorts of things like this which are reversible. You don't have to stay on this diet. That are a lot lower risk, and those kinds of things are more appropriate for the populace to be engaging in than gene editing. I think, yeah, Munch having like cat eyes and cat ears and a tail. I definitely would be up for feline augments. I would definitely like a lion tail. A mane. I've already got a mane.
There was an interview they did with some folk who had been studying CRISPR technologies, and you know, as much as we all want that big floofy tail, they had the discussion and they asked, "Hey, since we have this technology, could we make a unicorn?" And essentially, what their answer was yes, we could make a unicorn, but it's going to be grotesque and look nothing like you expected it to.
Yep.
I mean, this technology fascinates me, and I can't wait to see how it progresses over the next couple decades. But we are generations before we need to be seeing this on a commercial level.
I'd be prepared to do that, Munch, if you offered me a lion tail, 100%. And Munch says I'd have to cut a tail hole in my jeans. Yep. I don't know. Actually being able to become your persona, that'd be pretty cool.
I don't know, there's a weird amount of dystopian novels, movies, whatever, that you could tell they were written by closet furries. The Dune series, Ugly series, Cyberpunk 2077, I think it's called. It's canon that people turn into their personas. That's what all of this gene editing is about, is to give us those floofy tales. Do you have anything else here, or do we want to move on to the next topic?
Probably move on.
Okay. This one, we have been suggested before we even had our first episode. People want to talk about Brexit. It's not fair making the American do that, but by God, I did some research. I'm gonna let Simba have the first go at this. I know that we talked about this a little bit last week. The fact that Brexit more represents an idea of change rather than any actual policy that folk want. How do you view it?
I can't wait till it's bloody done with. I think that's the attitude of everyone in the UK. It's been going on for 3.5 years now, and we're sick of it. And it's meaning that domestic policy is being ignored. We've got, I think it's 250,000 people in the UK are homeless. The NHS is missing easily 10,000 nurses. Police is short of 20,000 police officers. And that's all being sort of shrugged and ignored because, oh, Brexit's more important. Look, fucking get us out of the EU. And if you're not going to get us out of it, revoke Article 50. This whole limbo of, oh, we're sort of thinking about it, and then, oh, we're going to have another delay for 6 months, or no, shut up, just get it done. That's how the UK feels. People are either very strongly revoke Article 50, remain immediately, or get it done right now, just leave the EU, fuck 'em. Now, I'm very much in the latter camp, but on both sides, people just want it over with. We're sick of it. Absolutely sick of it. Brexit, Brexit, Brexit. There's nothing but Brexit.
Yeah, I'm someone who believes that federal power is kind of integral to a globalized society, and my knee-jerk reaction with Brexit was that the UK just has to remain part of the. And sorry, what?
I really hope we don't. I mean, yes, I like centralized government to a point, but I like our centralized government. I don't want UK's policy decisions to be driven by Brussels, by politicians that I didn't elect, that no one in my country elected. Now we have some say on what goes on in Brussels, but we certainly don't have the majority say. The idea that European politicians are affecting policy in my country is unpalpable. And I don't like globalization either. I think, yeah, centralized government's good to a point, but you look at things that are too large, like the EU and even the USA, to a point, and you kind of think, how can you sensibly govern with one organization a set of people that's so diverse? I mean, this is why California and Texas keep trying to secede and become their own thing, because it's just impossible to do.
And no one really wants a from where you don't want people in Brussels being able to tell you as a Brit.
Mm.
And now, mind you, that's kind of hypocritical coming from someone who once owned basically every other country in the world. But that being said, yes, I get the knee-jerk reaction. I don't want someone somewhere else telling me how to live, but at the same time, I'm a North Carolinian, and we had the discussion privately before about how the UK or any other European country is almost it's essentially a state here in the way that we see the US. And
yeah, I mean, you mentioned sort of how European countries are sort of like your states. We do not want to be the United States of Europe. Most Europeans view America as a failed project, that it's too large and it can't govern itself. And you sort of mentioned there about sort of In a weird way, like if you said to a British person, "Oh, it's okay, you can't make good decisions. Europe makes better decisions than you anyway," they'd lynch you. You couldn't say that.
Oh, if I
um,
was not online, I would not be saying this right now. If I tried to say that to anyone from North
uh,
Carolina, they would be irate.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think yeah, you're correct with what you said at the start about it being sort of British people aren't happy with our current status quo, therefore we voted for something different, and we didn't really care what it was. I think I mentioned to you privately about how the day after the EU referendum we had in the UK, where we voted to leave, the number one search query on Google from the UK about the EU was "What is the EU?" So we didn't really vote out of the EU because we particularly dislike. I mean, I don't think people like it, don't get me wrong, but I don't think people really know very much about it. I think if you asked the average person in the UK, where is the EU based before Brexit, they wouldn't have known it was in Brussels. They just thought somewhere in Europe, probably France because it's next to us. Um, I think the one of the biggest things for me was immigration. We have, as I mentioned earlier, 250,000 homeless people in the UK. We have issues with overloading of the NHS. We have issues with not enough police and such. So I don't want 20 million more people from Europe coming to England, coming to the UK. That doesn't make me racist, which is what the Remainers like to pin. Oh, you're racist because you don't like immigration. No, I don't. It's not that I don't like immigration. I think that we should take care of the fucking people we've got here at the moment already. Now, that's more of a problem. We shouldn't have millions of families going to food banks in the UK because we don't have the resources to support the people we have. Yet you come here from Eastern Europe, Bulgaria, countries like this, and you bring 5 kids, then we got to put a house up for you because the EU says freedom of movement. Well, I don't like it, and I think it's wrong. We pay more into the EU than we get out of it. Yeah, and also there's a danger. It's not as imminent as the Leave campaigners threatened it to be, but the idea that countries like Turkey may join the EU in the future is frightening.
Yeah, I don't care where those people come from, and I really can't speak for the UK. I am not totally aware of how. I really need to look more at the way that the UK and the rest of the EU functions economically, but I look at America and no, no, we have more empty homes than homeless people. We have 75% of the food that we produce go uneaten and rot in landfills that are ill kept, and it will sit there for years upon years.
But bringing
It's
25% more people into your country is not going to help that problem.
it has to be done in conjunction with fundamental political change where
Mm,
I think the United States in particular needs to really invest in a state housing program
yeah, yeah.
where you at least get the bare minimum. When someone has somewhere to live, they are suddenly more economically productive. Who would have
Mm,
thought?
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
And we have programs like that in the UK, but you're not eligible for them if you're what's called voluntary homeless. And voluntary homeless is a terrible thing. It can be, for example, a woman who runs away from her husband because she's being beaten. She is technically voluntary homeless, therefore isn't entitled to things like a state house. And that's not good. People who are in situations like that shouldn't have to prove in a court and spend 3 years trying to argue that they deserve a place to live. But fundamentally, bringing 20 million more people over the next however many years to the UK is not going to help with that problem at all.
don't
Um,
forget that these are not going to be permanent residents. They're supposed to be, or I say supposed to be. The majority of them are. There will be people who overstay their visas. This is especially for
there's
Americans who think that most people coming in are crossing the border. No, they're
mm,
overstaying visas. But the majority who are coming here are refugees and are going to leave when it's safe to go home.
yeah,
These are
it's
not people who are looking to loot the system. These are people who are looking to avoid a gun being shot in their face.
yeah, it's not
I did
like
have
the EU migrants are not refugees. They're from the EU. The EU is not a not a sort of center of conflict. Yeah, we get refugees. That's cool. They're refugees. They need a place to go. but that's not the case of a Polish migrant who comes to the UK. That's not the case of a Bulgarian migrant or whatever.
Real quick, Munch had said exactly, Simba, when you vote against something, people choose to cherry pick things like immigration, accuse you of being racist. I have plenty of reason to believe that you're racist otherwise, Munch. I know what you laugh at.
No, that's fair, but...
Before we move on, there was one thing I wanted to mention. Brexit very well could be the right choice. I need to do more research and see what an actual Brexit with a deal could possibly look like. All the studies that I've looked at now say the soft exit could mean as much as a 5% loss of GDP over 15 years. It goes up to 20% if there's no deal. But if this was going to happen, I think this definitely needed to be like a 10-year sort of engagement. There is so much that the EU encompasses in their legislation. There's a great John Oliver episode where he mentions that pet visas, the ability to take your pet from one country in the EU to another country, could take as long as 8 months to sort out. So if you look at something as just useless as pet visas, think about what VAT tax or the tariffs or any of these sort of actual economic in the weed sort of issues are going to take. This was not something that was going to ever be solved in the couple years like they were promised.
Well, I think they, as I say, they just need to get on with it. And people are becoming less and less forgiving of politicians, and for the first time, we have 4 parties doing well in the opinion polls. That's unheard of, and it's because the 2 main parties are not delivering Brexit properly. That wouldn't happen otherwise. I just hope they, our current Prime Minister says October the 31st, we're leaving, whether we get a deal or not. I bloody well hope he sticks to that. I think if he doesn't, there'd be outrage, absolute outrage.
Alrighty, we do have time for a couple more topics.
Yeah.
Brexit definitely needs another episode, but we've spent 20-25 minutes here now.
Yeah, let's move on.
So we do have some suggestions from the folk in the audience. Do we want to do one more of the ones we had planned and then go to one of the others, or?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. Would you rather do self-confidence or automation?
Probably more confident off the top of my head on self-confidence stuff than automation.
All right. So we did do a podcast on this about a month ago, and it's about finding self-confidence, finding yourself. A lot of fun. I'm going to go ahead and let Simba start because I know that this is something that he's very confident on speaking on.
So I think self-confidence is something that a lot of furries struggle with. I guess because in the real world, many of us have struggled with self-belief. We've had people beat us down over and over, and it's a difficult skill, but it is a skill, and like any other skill, you can learn it with enough practice and the right sort of techniques and principles. I think a lot of people believe that you're either born with confidence or you're not, and no, that's not what it's like at all. I think it's the kind of thing which everyone should work on a little bit each day. And in order to start, I think you really need to learn to love yourself. If you don't have self-love, you can't really build self-belief and you can't build self-confidence. I mean, how can you have any kind of confidence in something you don't like? That's a non-starter, really. So you have to learn to treat yourself well. Treat yourself like you treat your best friend is the phrase that is used. And I think people find that difficult for some reason. It's you might, as part of your internal dialogue, say things that are hateful towards yourself that you'd never say to a friend. And that's just very easy to do, and people just accept doing that to themselves as if it's normal, and that needs to be stopped for people to start building self-confidence.
I think the biggest issue, especially in the furry, for trying to find their self-confidence is they really don't know where to start.
Mm-hmm.
And the 2 pieces of advice I could give on that is that When you have the support system behind you, be it your friends in real life, be it communities like Furry Valley, be it your family, be it whomever, uh, when you have them to not necessarily hold your hand, but at least be that person there to catch you should you fall, you should feel significantly confident when trying to experience new things, which is the biggest thing to increasing your confidence. It's to put yourself out of your comfort zone. It's to experience things that you have not had the opportunity to experience before. And as someone who has been historically very timid, I just kind of consciously made that decision in college that I was done with it and that I was going to force myself to be in those uncomfortable situations. And while some of them in smaller groups, I felt confident enough trying to to introduce myself, to integrate myself. When I was looking at much larger prospects on my campus, I had a small group of friends who I had convinced to come with me to perhaps join themselves. To we were there to support each other, and it makes those scary things a lot less scary to face. And eventually, when you continually expose yourself to these new experiences, they become less and less intimidating, and suddenly you find that you're able to confront new challenges, new places, new people with a fraction of that anxiety that you confronted it with before. So, if people are looking to find their confidence, the my advice to you is to just practice. And yeah, it might suck at first, and yeah, it might not be comfortable, but every time you do it, it's going to be easier from there.
Yeah, I think the whole idea of taking initiative is a really big one. We occasionally get people come to us upset. They're like, "Oh, I can't join in. I feel like I don't know anyone and I'm too shy." Well, okay, I get that to a point, but just say something, you know? You can't expect people to do everything to give you the self-confidence if you're not going to at least try a little bit yourself. Often, if you lack confidence, you're not going to do something which you may otherwise be able to, and it's a shame you lose opportunities by limiting yourself in this way. And in my own case, I've got autism Asperger's syndrome, and there was a time where I couldn't speak to people like at all. I just sort of freeze up, and I certainly couldn't speak in front of anyone. And I it probably was 2 years into my first job. I must have been about 22, 23 or so. And I was like, oh, screw it. I'm sick of not being able to talk in front of people. I wanted to be a manager at my old work. And so I decided I was going to give a presentation to my whole company. Never been more shit and nervous in my whole life. It was extremely frightening, but I got through it. And being able to get through that sort of situation where you're terrified about it, but it was okay. You didn't die from it. It was okay in the end. Um, and each time you sort of expose yourself to that sort of thing, it's kind of like what are they cognitive behavioral therapy, where you do something and you let yourself be in that sort of uncomfortable state for just a little bit, and then a little, next time it's a little bit better. Um, but now I talk to people, no problem. I make a right fool of myself and I don't care. I think that was the most important thing for me, was not learning to not care what other people thought of me.
So I guess the message from both of us here is for someone asking, how do I become more confident doing X? It's to just do it.
Do X, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Ideally, as you said, do it in a situation where if you fall on your face, it don't matter too much. You will wake up the next day and it'll be okay, and you might feel a little bit silly, but the sort of end goal is not caring what other people think about you, because ultimately, self-confidence comes from, I think a large part of it is people generally are concerned that others might think less of them if they fail at something. And generally, people aren't paying much attention to that. They're focused on what they're doing. Um, so if you can get to the point where you realize that and therefore you're not really too worried about what other people think about you or how they judge what you've done, you'll do more naturally because you'll be less afraid of a potential negative outcome. And it's really empowering and it's fun. You can go in the middle of your town square and you can chase the pigeons as a 25-year-old. You don't care, you're having fun. Why not? You can make a fool of yourself in a voice chat. Who cares? Just people on the internet. It's not like it matters. And as soon as you get to that sort of level of just carefree, I'm living my life, and if you don't like it, screw off. There's 7 billion people in the world. I'm sure some of them will like me, right? It's difficult to get to that point, but if you can get to that point and keep that as your goal, and always remember that those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind. A lot of people, and you will find people eventually who you can be yourself around, and you don't need to worry about various things. You can fail in the ways you might fail, and they'll still love you. And that sort of lack of judgment and acknowledgement to yourself that it doesn't matter because the people who are worth caring about wouldn't think bad of you anyway. That's really powerful.
Alrighty, so I guess that's a good place to end on that. We wanted to do one of our Floof Talk suggestions, though, and Blank wanted to know what kind of music we're into.
Anything with a good tune, if it sounds good, I don't care whether it's rap or pop or rock or whatever. If it's got a good melody, then I'll listen to it and sing along to it. Female vocals are good.
So do you have an absolute favorite artist?
Not really. Just a bit of everything that sounds good. I do like the sort of. All right, I like Miley Cyrus.
You like the absolute gayest
I
music.
do. I like Jessie
Taylor
J. I
Swift.
like Lady Gaga. I like Taylor Swift. Yep, I like all of these. Yeah, Demi Lovato. Oh, goodness me. A bit of Nicki Minaj as well. God, I'm so classy, aren't I? This is why you guys love me. What about you? What are you into?
So I like absolutely everything.
Hmm.
I mostly listen to rap right now. Big fan of DaBaby, Young Thug, Danny Brown.
They have such
Uh,
funny names. Never heard of any of them.
I'll have to send you some because I like anything that has a lot of bass.
Hmm.
Uh,
You like dubstep?
uh, Not so much, but that's more noise than bass. I'm
Oof, oof, oof. Speaking of
eh,
that sort of stuff, I guess dance music is good. Avicii is good. I like him.
oh goodness, I didn't actually start listening to any of his music until after he died.
Oh, really? Really good. Like his stuff. Do we have
Alrighty, do
any
you think?
other little bits and pieces, or is that all?
Let's see.
Do we do we really call the back of the car a boot? Yeah, the back of the car where you put like your shopping in. Yeah, that's the boot of the car. You guys call it like the hood, right? Oh,
Uh,
that's where the poor people live. What do you call the
uh,
back of the car?
the trunk.
The trunk, right, right. No,
Oh,
the hood is the front. Okay,
yeah.
right. Yeah, we call the front the bonnet. The bonnet is the front and the boot is the back. I don't know. I guess it's sort of like the head. You got a bonnet, which is a headwear item. You got your boot, which is your footwear. So it makes sense. The bonnet is the front, and the boot is the back. We have all sorts of quirky words in English. Like we say we dip a biscuit in our tea, but you guys say it's a cookie. And if you think of a biscuit in tea, you think of this bread thing like that. Yeah, we have all sorts of interesting words.
Whereas we might call it a gun, you call it a Rudy two point and shooty.
Oh, Senko, I love it. All about the floof. No, what can it be? Like no humans.
Oh my god.
I like it. Megan Trainor. Yes, 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 yes. I like that song. Good choice.
Anyways, do we want to go ahead and wrap up?
Yeah, sounds good.
Alrighty, well, thanks for coming out, y'all. Simba, thanks for coming out as well tonight. It was absolutely wonderful as expected.
Yeah, likewise. I love this time with you. That sounded gay, didn't it? Jesus Christ.
Uh, beyond, but I've definitely seen gayer. I've heard you sing.
You've heard me sing. Oh no.